The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on WSFMLP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. You can find radio-friendly versions of this show of 59 minutes in length by visiting archive.org and searching for the collection called The Final Straw. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. This week we're airing 3 segments on the show. First, there's an interview that Bursts held with Michael Davis Africa, a member of the MOVE organization. MOVE is a Philadelphia-based Black liberation group founded by John Africa in 1972. The group lives communally. During the conversation, Michael talks about the case of the MOVE9, who were 9 members of that group who were arrested and accused of the killing of a police officer in 1978 in Philadelphia, a charge they each deny. Officer James Ramp was killed following a year of the Philly PD blockading the house for a year under an eviction order, and the police besieged the house on August 8, 1978. The MOVE9 have been incarcerated for almost 40 years now, with Merle and Phil dying behind bars. Police and white supremacist-affiliated groups have successfully gotten parole denied for Eddie, Michael, and Delbert Africa over the last 9 months, as they do for many political prisoners from the 1960s through the 80s in the U.S. There are upcoming parole hearings for Janet, Janine, and Debbie Africa, and more info on who to petition for their release can be found at onamove.com/move-9. Coming up this Saturday, February 24th, starting at 4 p.m., there'll be an event called Framed in America, The Making of Political Prisoners. This will take place at the National Black Theater, 2031 5th Avenue in Harlem, New York, and will include presentations by Ramona Africa, Freddie Hampton Jr., Pam Africa, Roger Wareham, Betty Davis, Ralph Poynter, and Johanna Fernandez. More info can be found on the Justice for the MOVE9 fedbook group or in our blog post for this show. The second conversation you'll hear today is an interview by Dissident Island Radio from London from their February 2nd episode. In this, a collective member interviews filmmaker Jordan Brown, director of Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, discussing their documentary about screen culture and its implications. The film is available for free on YouTube, archive.org, and truthstreammedia.com, and more from Dissident Island is online at dissidentisland.org. DI is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts available at channelzeronetwork.com, and here's a little jingle from another member, Rust Belt Abolition Radio, who just did a lovely show on the Zapatista movements in Chiapas, Mexico.
How can we imagine a world beyond prisons and police, borders and surveillance?
Rust Belt Abolition Radio is an abolitionist media and movement-building project based in Detroit, Michigan.
Each monthly episode amplifies the voices of those impacted by mass incarceration and explores ongoing work in the movement to abolish the carceral state and racial capitalism.
Tune in to Rust Belt Abolition Radio here on the Channel Zero network and visit www.rustbeltradio.org to learn more.
Finally, we'll be airing an interview conducted by our friends at Cherna Lukna on Radio Student in Ljubljana, Slovenia, that they conducted with members of an anarcho-syndicalist collective from Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. The segment was released as a part of the February 2018 edition of Bad News, Angry Voices from Around the World from the A-Radio network, of which The Final Straw, Cherna Lukna, and Dissident Island are members. More from Chernalukna can be found at radiostudent.si by searching for Chernalukna. That's CRNALUKNJA. And it means black hole in Slovenian.
For an update on the Operation Push prisoners' struggle in Florida, check out our blog post or podcast info for this episode. And if you'd like to get updates on Operation Push on the regs, check out fighttoxicprisons.wordpress.com.
But first, here are some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll call like a
I have recorded this segment as part of my commitment to serious journalism that tackles real issues. The following is my open letter to the U.S. Institute of Peace, a federal agency in Washington, D.C. Dear U.S. Institute of Peace, what the f***? Anybody home? As far as I can tell, historically, humans have been praying for world peace since back in the biblical days. World peace has been an important goal for most humans, and an especially important goal to most beauty pageant contestants for thousands of years. Your agency, the Institute of Peace, has been funded by the federal government since sometime in the last century. That means you've been working on world peace for a while now. So, where are we in terms of goal accomplishment? I think that's a fair question. You are, after all, the Institute of Peace. That means your mission is to create conditions for establishing world peace. Now, I realize you don't get a fraction of the funding that the Department of Defense gets. And we have to keep in mind that the Department of Defense used to be called the Department of War back in America's salad days. So that means the Department of War gets a huge war chest not afforded to the Institute of Peace. I get it. You're at a disadvantage. A financial disadvantage. Also, the Department of War has a whole lot of people very close to the President, including its own cabinet member. And because you're a mere institute and not a department, you don't have a cabinet position. Again, a disadvantage. So I don't want to simply snipe you for having failed at establishing world peace. But damn, have you taken a look out your window lately? The whole planet looks like a wrestling convention with a free kegger, but without the tights and the hairspray. It's pretty hectic. And it seems like things are getting worse. Your boss keeps calling the leader of one nuclear power Rocket Man. That can't be good. What are you doing, for instance, to track global violence? It would seem that violence erupts continually in unexpected places. Given your institute's lack of boots on the ground, I can only assume that you didn't see the latest outbreaks of violence coming. Yet, when I watch BBC News, I note that in every new conflict I see the same white Toyota pickup with the masked kids in the back sporting AK-47s. That white Toyota pickup has been on the scene for every new conflict going back to Rwanda and beyond. So, if those kids in that pickup can anticipate the next hotspot from Baghdad to Baltimore, I have to wonder what they know that you don't. And really, to track global violence, all you really need is the GPS on that white Toyota pickup. I think if I ever get out of prison, I'm going to get a white Toyota pickup. You know how many miles that thing must have? And it clearly runs like a champ. Maybe you guys should invest in your own white Toyota pickups. It seems that whatever your institute is driving is at a serious disadvantage to that white Toyota pickup. Another question. In terms of world peace, do you guys have like a timeline planned? I ask this because if you don't even have a timeline, I have to wonder if you're really serious. If there's no timeline, then you're not really trying to establish world peace at all. You don't even have a vision for getting to the final destination. World peace is some serious shit. We can't just have you floundering around. Do you need more public support, more funding? Perhaps you just need to get your institute's name out there so folks know you're on the job. Maybe you should shake things up a bit. You could sell t-shirts with the slogan, "Peace, dude." Or maybe have somebody in your office challenge Tanya Harding on celebrity boxing and beat the hell out of her. Or face off against the Pentagon in a pay-per-view paintball match. Nothing could further the cause of world peace like shooting the Joint Chiefs in the face. With a paintball gun, I mean. All I'm saying is, whatever you're doing now, it's not working. In my lifetime, it doesn't feel like we're getting closer to world peace. It feels like we're getting further away from it. You gotta do something. the white Toyota pickup kids are kicking your ass. Have you thought about tracking the money? You know, following the guns and bombs and bullets back to their origins to determine who it is that's profiting off of global war? Maybe you could identify those making the fortunes, and you could seize their assets. Then, when you've seized all those war profits, the Joint Chiefs and all the government contractors would be the ones that have to go beat up Tanya Harding on celebrity boxing to raise their own funds. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from War and Corruption in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain, 243-205, Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio, 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
We're speaking with Michael Davis Africa, a supporter of the MOVE9 prisoners. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Can you please tell listeners what your relationship to the MOVE organization is and how you became involved?
I was born in MOVE. I've been in MOVE for most of my life. Raised in MOVE from the age of around 13. So now, I was born in MOVE, but I wasn't always in MOVE. My grandmother and my aunt, who was in MOVE at the time when I was young, they took me out of the organization when they left the organization. And so for about eight or 9 years, I was gone from the organization. The reason they had me under their custody is because my mother and my father are two members of the MOVE9, and they've been in prison for now going on 40 years. So I lived with my grandmother. When she left, she took me with her. And I've been in the organization. Ramona Africa was in jail in 1992. She was getting out. She came out of jail, and I asked her if she would come. My mother asked me if she would come and pick me up and take me back to MOVE, and she did. So I've been back ever since.
So like you said, this year it's year number 40 since the police assault on and attempt to evict the MOVE house in Powelton Village in Philadelphia. Can you talk briefly about the history of the MOVE organization and the circumstances that led up to the eviction of the house at North 33rd Street?
The belief system of the organization is simple. It's life. We believe that life is right, life is important, life is necessary, and that which gets in the way of it or interferes with it or hinders it, we know that it ain't right. And, we've always made our position clear and put it out and exposed the wrongs in the system and how the system is doing and how they're polluting the air and the water and the soil and how they lock people up that are innocent, and the people that are guilty, they let them be presidents and all that. So we talk about it, we expose it, and we're not quiet about it. And they targeted MOVE as a result of it because we were talking about the wrongs in it. And like in other examples where you can see people talking about wrong things, like today's Black Lives Matter or like Mumia Abu Jamal, different people speaking about it, they target you for it, and that's what they did with us. And as a result of their targeting us, one incident led up to another incident, and it got to the point where they attacked our people, and Janine Africa was holding her 3-week-old baby, and the cops knocked the baby out of her arms and trampled him to death. And so, MOVE took a defensive stance on May 20th, 1977, and said, look, we took an armed defensive stance on a platform that was built by MOVE founder John Africa, and we said we ain't going to allow this. We ain't accepting this. No more beating MOVE people and killing MOVE people behind closed doors. If you're going to do this to us, you're going to do it for the whole world to see. And so, as that standoff, as that initial reaction to MOVE baby being killed, it became a standoff, and it lasted for about a year. It culminated into the police coming into our house, claiming that we had housing code violations as a justification to raid the house and bring 600 Philly cops to our house shot it up with tear gas and water cannons and thousands of bullets. And that was on August 8th, 1978. As a result of it, they shooting at their and MOVE people. They shot one of their own, and of course blamed it on MOVE. And so that's what happened. That's how it escalated. I'm giving you the very short version, but that's how it escalated. And that culminated into MOVE people trying to get our people out of jail and putting pressure on the city to release the people from jail. And that culminated into them dropping a bomb on us and killing 11 MOVE people. That was May 13th, 1985. So, when these things happen, it's the culmination. It's not like a, MOVE believes his life. This stuff happened and it got like it did because the system would not accept, what MOVE is talking about. They poison in the water. They poison in the food that we got to eat, and that they got to eat too. But as a result of MOVE speaking about it and threatening and challenging the industry that makes them all of that money and all, they wasn't willing to listen to what is right, and compromise all of that money that they're making. So it's no different than the gun manufacturer. These gun manufacturers will sell guns to an 18-year-old. They'll go to a school in Florida, shoot it up, and kill people, and they ain't going to change the laws about the guns because they're making too much money from them guns. They don't care that 17 people just got shot down in Florida. As long as they can make the money they're making, they don't care. And so it's the same thing with the pollution that they put in the water. As long as Sunoco and Texaco and all of these other oil companies are drilling into the earth and taking all of this oil out of the earth and making gasoline so that people can use it and so that they can make billions and billions of dollars off of it, they don't care about anybody or the environment and how it damages it and how it, messes up people. They don't care about that. So MOVE would talk about this stuff. We would expose this stuff, and that was a threat to them. So that their reaction and their response to it was to drop a bomb on us.
Well, so going back to the 1978 assault, though, can you talk about the MOVE9 prisoners, who they are, and what their conditions are?
So the MOVE9 are they're 9 people that were arrested on August 8th, and they've been in prison for almost 40 years. And the conditions are, for some of the prisons, the conditions are bad enough that if you went to prison as a regular, healthy human being, after 3 months or 6 months or maybe a year, you probably would have diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and all kind of other stuff. Because the food is so poor quality. The food that is salty is super salty. The stuff that's sweet is super sweet. It's made intentionally, set up to like mess the people up and leave them weak. And so, two MOVE members have died since as a result of the poor conditions of prison and just being confined, the way they were. Not being able to get the adequate treatment that you need for medical conditions or whatever. I mean, all of that is part of the prison system and how it's set up and how there's such a lack of concern or care for the people. Like they don't feel like they should have to give any kind of concern because they don't really care. What do they care about a bunch of people that they think of as being criminals anyway? And so the conditions are horrible. You got people in prison who don't have teeth because of the food that they've been feeding them for all those years is so bad that they lose their teeth. And then the medical situation up there is so bad that the people can't even trust them. That they go in needing something and come out with hepatitis. They come out with diseases from the system, from the hospital of the system of prison. So, the whole thing is bad. MOVE people do the best they can. Just like most of the people in prison, just do the best they can with what they have.
So multiple MOVE prisoners are going to be up for parole this year. Can you tell listeners what they can do to support them and help to try to get them released?
Well, one thing that we've been telling people to do is to call the parole board and write letters to the parole board and inquire about why they've been denied for parole for the last 10 years. They have spotless prison records for the last 20 or 30 years. They have recommendations from the prison staff, from the wardens, from the guards, from the counselors. They have their home plans in place. Everything that they need to do, as far as meeting the criteria for parole, they have met. But the parole board is just continually denying them because it's a personal vendetta. You know, when you look at like how the MOVE9 has been up for parole, and when they go to parole, the DA has a say. Not the DA's office, but the actual DA who was the prosecutor in 1978. His name is on the paperwork. He actually gets a say in whether or not they should be paroled or not. That's ridiculous. That's like a MOVE member being on a jury case where a cop killed somebody. They would never allow that. But they expect people to just allow them to have the same people who worked in prosecuting them be basically juror and judge again. You know, so it's like, where's the justice? Why does he have a say? He had his say in 1978 that gave them a 100-year prison sentence. So why does he have a say in it now? What does he have to do with their? I thought prison was there to like correct people. What does he have to do with them? And he hasn't been around them for the last 40 years. How is it that he can make a judgment or determination as to who they are now, as opposed to 40 years ago, and what he say be actually respected and accepted? It's because they don't care about the advancement or the correction of people. They're not even interested in it. They're trying to keep people in jail that they feel is a threat to, to their system, and they're not trying to let those people out because they don't want their system threatened, because they want to keep up and uphold this industry. And we are threatening industry because it's wrong. And so, when you come that way, they come the way they come. But it still don't make it right. Still don't make it right.
What's the name of that former DA?
John Straub, Straub.
All right, good to know. That'd be a good thing for people to include in their letters, I guess.
Yeah, and the parole board themselves. Leo Dunn is an LGBTQ community activist, and he's like, talking about. I mean, he's one of those people who supposedly like believe in progressive change and all of that kind of stuff. Where is that same attitude when it comes to movement? They got FOT members on the parole board. I mean, it's crazy. So people need to call the governor's office and the lieutenant governor and put pressure on them, inquire about it. Get the news media involved. Go to your local news station and explain to them how 40 years later these people are sitting in jail for something that the judge himself admitted he didn't know if they did it or not. He admitted it.
And just because you mentioned it, the FOP is the Fraternal Order of Police, which is like the police union, yeah?
Correct.
And I mean, this is like a perpetual problem, especially it seems like in the Northeast, where like Black liberation and like liberation struggles that were birthed out of the 60s and progressed onwards, or religious organizations like MOVE, are facing, if there's anything having to do or with the possibility of a dead cop, the FOP, I mean, the cops are involved in the parole boards, and if they haven't just been a cop, they've been a judge, they've been something else, and they stick together.
Yeah, they do. They stick together, whether they're seen as right or whether it's blatantly obvious that they're wrong. And it's wrong. I mean, like, what's the purpose of the police department? What's the purpose of it? I mean, if they're just going to stick together, no matter if they're wrong, what's the purpose of it? What's the point of it? I mean, they're supposed to be locking up criminals. They ain't supposed to just be sticking by with what they call their brother cop or sister cop. They're supposed to be locking up criminals. And we can't trust them to to defend what is right, what's the point of the police department? I mean, if you're just going to have people sticking together and bond over that and act like that's some kind of like righteous camaraderie, then that's a clear indication that they biased. And being that that's a clear indication that they biased, how are we supposed to expect justice or get any kind of righteous determination from them? They don't care about us. They just care about sticking together.
On February 24th, there's a large event planned to support the MOVE prisoners. Can you talk about what's set to happen? Who's going to speak there?
In New York City. Yeah, that's it. That's a program that is that we're setting up to like a panel. So we're bringing in people to try to raise awareness about the case, about the MOVE9, about what happened. This is 40 years. They've been framed in America for 40 years. It's a program that we're doing to just get people aware of what this is and what this. I mean, they longest trial in U.S. history was the MOVE9 trial in 1978. Why is that? Clear, if it was clear cut that MOVE was innocent, or if it was even like a doubt, like that trial would not have been the longest trial in U.S. history. You know what I'm saying? Like, so this kind of information needs to be put out. The women, the men, they don't even have any weapons charges on them. The judge admitted that he didn't know if they did it or not. There were other women that were arrested on that day who were in the house with the movement, and they were released by Judge Ivins, released those 3 women because he said he didn't have any evidence that they were movement. So if the issue is guilt, what religion they belong to or what organization they belong to have to do with if they killed this person or not. So it's personal. It's a personal vendetta. They don't have any interest in being fair. They're trying to punish MOVE because MOVE challenged them and expose them, and they want to make them suffer for it. Like they want to punish them for it. Like these people that when it comes to people doing things to try to like keep their name out there so that people don't forget the wrong that was done to them, they expect you to forget it. But every year, they on September 11th, they put up their signs and they talk about never forget on September 11th. They put up their flags and all of that. On 4th of July, they greet their neighbors happy birthday, and they wear their flags and they barbecue and they talk all of this about the Revolutionary War, and they act like that was such a, they don't want people to forget that kind of stuff. But when it comes to people being killed, when it comes to things like the Holocaust, they want to stop talking about that kind of stuff. Yet they killed Hitler. Some people killed 6 million Jews, over 6 million Jews, according to the Jews. They don't want people to talk about that stuff. And how America was all hand in hand working alongside with that stuff.
Do you have any details on the New York event, like where it's happening and where people can find out more information?
People can go online on Facebook and look up the MOVE organization, and they can find any information that they want to find about that event.
Can you talk about Mumia Abu-Jamal, the journalist, the political prisoner, and former Black Panther who supported MOVE and suffered at the hands of the Philly PD for it? Can you describe Mumia's case and his current situation?
Yeah, like the thing with Mumia was one of very few journalists who would actually tell the truth about what was happening with MOVE. So when E. Stephen Collins got on the radio, when Mumia got on the radio, they would actually say what happened. If the cops came and beat MOVE, or they went into the prison and 22 guards beat 8 MOVE members and a couple of MOVE members, into broken limbs, broken bones, bloody, broken testicles. This is what cops or prison guards did to MOVE on December 3rd, 1981. And when Mumia would go to the prison to talk to them, he would right, in stories and print what happened. He wouldn't just take Move's word for it, and he didn't just take the cops' word for it. Well, to the police, that wasn't good enough for them. They wanted him to slant it their way and have Move looking like they were just a bunch of crazy with raggedy hair. So, because he wouldn't do that, he was targeted. And they were trying to make an example of him to the other reporters who might possibly get the same inkling to do, to tell the truth. And as a result of him being targeted, it is clear that he was targeted, and therefore people have rallied around it to support him because it's so clear. It's so clear that he wasn't on death row because of the accusation of killing a cop.
Well, Michael, that was the questions that I had. Thank you very much for chatting, and I wish health for your family and for you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Now let's hear from the lovelies at Dissident Island Radio, dissidentisland.org.
We live in a techno-dazzled world, and there's considerable resistance to the very idea of challenging technology.
Is that Google Glass? Is that Google Glass? Is that Google Glass?
And now we have computers. They tie the world together. They accelerate communication. They make corporate globalization more likely and more effective. And they accelerate its negative impacts. Nearly all information we get from about technology comes from the people who invent, promote, and sell it. We don't really need to hear from them at this event. We hear from them every day on TV and on the internet. We've been hearing from them for years. We don't need Eric Schmidt to tell us about computers, driverless cars, and Google Glass. We get it. We want to discuss the rest of the story. What else do they bring? How do they unify our minds within a certain worldview? How do they envelop us within their frameworks? What are their hidden harms to the planet? And how do we deal with the staggering information imbalance that exists right now in our country on these questions?
I'm here speaking to Jordan Brown, director of Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, a new documentary about screen-based culture. Just to give our listeners some context as to the focus of the film, we live in a world of screens. The average adult spends the majority of their waking hours in front of some sort of screen or device. We're enthralled, we're addicted to these machines. How did we get here? Who benefits? What are the cumulative impacts on people, society and the environment? What may come next if this culture is left unchecked to its end trajectory? Is that what we want? Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties investigates these questions with an urge to return to the real physical world, to form a critical view of technological escalation, driven, rapacious and pervasive corporate interest. Covering themes of addiction, privacy, surveillance, information manipulation, behaviour modification and social control, the film lays the foundations as to why we may feel like we're sleep running into some dystopian nightmare with the machines at the helm. So thanks for joining us, Jordan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Perhaps we could start with you telling us a bit about your background in film and what led you to making this particular documentary.
Well, the story of how I came to begin this film sort of started in 2009. It was a very different idea for a film all the way back then. Back then, the germ of the idea for me was to use Google as a case study to sort of to talk about issues such as privacy and surveillance and the way that information had become privatized and sort of vacuumed up into one centralized repository. I mean, at that time, Google had started scanning a bunch of out-of-print books and was assembling for itself a sort of a large online repository of books that were out of print, sort of assembling it from itself and to use that repository of information not as an open source kind of library sort of thing, but to essentially privatize that information so they could sell ads. Like Google's whole business model is runs on advertising, so that was their whole shtick. But back then in 2009, I sort of saw coming from Google was sort of this sort of normalization of a surveillance culture where they had their sort of street view cars were relatively new at that time, sort of driving around, photographing people's houses and publishing those pictures online without sort of getting permission from anybody. And I think I realized in 2009 the idea back then for the film was to use Google as a case study to start to explore some of these issues. What does it mean when one big powerful company has a very sort of profound influence over our information experience? You know, it's one of the most used search engines, and it still is. Well, it was back then and still is. I set off to sort of make a film about that. But in the process of making that film, I started to do some interviews and speak to some experts and just to start trying to form a narrative. But throughout that process, I got bowled over pretty quickly because some of the interviews that I had sort of branched out into these broader topics, such as this culture's fascination with artificial intelligence and intelligent machines and sort of anthropomorphizing machines, so into like to have human manifestations or to be mimicking human kind of, I guess, traits or characteristics or something. So I think I quickly realized that back then that it wasn't just one company, it wasn't just Google, and it wasn't just one technology, it wasn't just the internet. It was sort of this interplay between a bunch of technologies, digital technologies in general, and the impact on society. So I kind of had a bit of a break. I had to step back and sort of widen my view a little bit. What ended up as being the result was a critique of, as the film lays out, this sort of culture of screens. And what I mean by screen culture is the way in which we've arrived in this sort of technological situation. We're spending up to 11 hours a day in front of some sort of device. So I think the film really opened up when I took that wider view.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit of the story behind the name.
Well, the story behind the name, well, that's a good question. I did a short film in, I think it was 2013, one of the first shorts that I did, that was written by a friend of mine who was writing a book at the time about themes dealing with addiction. And one of the lines in an essay she wrote, which is where I got the title from, is she sort of ends her essay with that sort of with the title of the film, "Stare into the Lights, My Pretties," which she's talking about in her work there, the way in which if we are sort of enthralled to these machines, we become sort of docile and really wrapped up in the narrative of the technology and sort of distracted from the real world, really taken out of the real world and into this sort of virtual environment. So I borrowed that phrase from her. I really admire her work, and it sort of like pays homage to where the journey for filmmaking for me sort of began.
So obviously the way society and like global culture has progressed over recent years, the amount of time people spent in front of screens, as you allude to, has increased. But would you accept that there is both positive and negatives to be identified here, like for any said individual?
Yeah, there definitely are a bunch of positives and a bunch of negatives. I think some of the positives that we've seen in the early days and still sort of do see are still definitely true. Like for instance, the way in which a lot of us now, I think there's 3.8 billion people online today that have access to, the world's information at their fingertips. That's definitely a positive. There are a whole bunch of negative effects that I want to focus on in the film and go through. And I think I do this purposefully because we often see and often hear a lot in the sort of narratives, the grand general narratives about technology, that, technology is great and that the internet sort of ushered in this grand sort of leveling, that, leveled the playing field for access to technology and publishing. And while that's true, I think some of the negative effects aren't so much concentrated on in a similar way or in the same way. So, for example, the way that the internet has given rise to this very sort of pervasive and invasive surveillance society. And in fact, one of the inventors of the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, a few years ago, recently sort of said publicly that the internet has now become the world's largest surveillance network. And I mean, there are other negative impacts that the film sort of goes through. I mentioned addiction before. I mean, that's definitely something that we sort of see concerning today, not just in young people, but in all of us, in many different societies as well. So there's problems of addiction, there's the way it sort of changes the way we think and feel, and we can talk about things like short attention spans, and we're not reading as much, and we're not having contemplative thinking time, we don't really go deep with ideas. But there's also another really concerning negative impact that I think that's very profound at the moment, which is the something that you mentioned in the introduction there, was the sort of information manipulation and sort of behaviour modification. I think that's something that's very central to modern digital tools, in which where we're having this circumstance now where there's this concept called the filter bubble, which is explored in the film, which I think is a very profound and complex problem that we're seeing sort of play out at the moment, where, you know, your online information experience is very different to mine, because companies of the dominant companies that control our online experience have gone out of their way to personalize their experience for each of us. So we're all sort of having this very atomized, unique, individualized sort of information experience that is strongly influencing and shaping the way we perceive and experience the world, that is having not just profound social impacts, but I think on a personal level as well. So there's a bunch of negative impacts that I think really need to be weighed up against the positives. So yeah, there are some positives and there are some negatives, but I think the negatives don't often get focused on as much, especially with such a broader view. So, you know, how they all interplay between each other, and how they not only affect us on the personal level, but also as a society and at a cultural level as well.
How much would you say the issues identified in the film are actually particular to the current time? By that I mean, were people not making similar arguments with the arrival of television or other such technology, which ultimately paved the way for the computer as a centralised kind of domesticised item? Could it be the case that the current generation believing these issues are that important is actually ignoring the concerns of previous generations?
Yeah, I've heard this a little bit, and it's something that I sort of touch on in the film a tiny little bit, that, yeah, there have been prior criticisms dealing with the way in which previous technological escalation has had a social impact. Say, it's what people sort of talked about when the telephone arrived, or the impacts of the television, and, you know, prior to that, sort of the printing press and how that impacted on memory and things like that. But there's a neuroscientist in the film that features quite heavily, Susan Greenfield from Oxford in the UK. One of her very interesting takes on this is that what we see today with the convergence of digital technologies mean that the changes that we're seeing are unprecedented. It's not, I mean, there have been impacts that have come out of, very serious impacts that have, you know, changed the way society is organised and changed the way who we are as sort of people, but coming out of the television and the printing press and the telephone, and I mean even things like the car, the automobile, the way that in which the world has been totally transformed into car parks and highways and things like this. There is a critique of technology that's sort of not a new thing. But I think one of the things that makes this era's different to others is this sort of, not only the convergence of technologies, but the way in which they've changed a significant portion of our experience from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. And again, we're handing over this and strengthening this arrangement of corporate power in a way that perhaps prior technologies haven't done in such a short amount of time and maybe not so concentrated. So I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, it's not a new idea to have a social critique of technology and sort of be looking at the convergence. But I think, yeah, that there perhaps hasn't been times like these times.
In the film, there is a strong focus at a particular point on the neurological implications of continual exposure to screen-based devices. But is there anything in the film which addresses the ethically problematic circumstances around the manufacture of such items, like screen-based technology such as, you know, the mobile phone, the computer, PlayStation?
I think it's alluded to. I mean, I'm definitely interested, and the film definitely has an underlying tone and theme of the environmental impacts of digital technology. But it's not something that I go through in detail. I mean, there's sort of suggestions throughout. We sort of look at the way, or there's lots of footage of, you know, e-waste and the impacts of, you know, what happens when we discard our used mobiles. You know, where does the rubbish go? Where does the garbage go? What happens with the plastic? And there's also footage of you know, the working conditions in Foxconn, for example. You know, the people that are assembling iPhones and what their conditions are like, that are exposed to toxic chemicals and things like this. And there is a suggestion of looking at the impacts of, say the rare earth mineral mining that is required to assemble all sorts of digital devices. But I think it's that this sort of topic is very big, and I guess it's a film in and of itself, to look at. And it's something perhaps maybe I'll explore next. That is a very important conversation to be having too. And yeah, what happens when we throw it away? What happens when we get a new, we upgrade our device in 2 years' time, as is, by design? What happens when we chuck all that stuff away,
I mean, as an extension there, I was going to ask the question of to what extent would you say these developments are actually an extension of colonialism, given the fact that the sourcing of materials from certain parts of the world, namely primarily Democratic Republic of Congo, has actually resulted, this industry has actually sort of indirectly played a massive role in a civil war which has claimed more lives than any other in recent times. But just, I guess, moving on, do you think that increased access to information afforded by the world of screens has meant that populations have more of a chance to be educated in the modern day?
Yeah, I think we do have the opportunity to be more educated if we would want. And that's, I guess, the grand hope of digital technologies, that we'll use these tools to really learn what's happening in the real world and engage with the real world. But I think one of my concerns in making this film is that we really don't see that happening. I mean, there's a bunch of social commentators that feature in the film that sort of have this concern. Eli Parissa is one of them that sort of has this concern about, we have this connectivity like we've never had before, but really it's hard to see it playing out in the numbers, and also in a general sense with sort of people's informedness on a larger scale, on a really general scale. We're sort of seeing this instead, perhaps a disengagement from things like real politics, and certainly, I guess, again speaking very generally, a turning away from the real world and more of an engagement with, perhaps people just want to play computer games and watch Game of Thrones instead of, learning about the horrors that are happening in the real world. And on one level, that's actually really understandable. That makes me sad. The reality of the world that we live in is actually very dark and tragic. We're living in sort of horrible times, and facing that reality can be very depressing and very challenging, and certainly confronts our position of privilege and things like this. So on one level, it's understandable that it can be too much for people and we just want to give up on it and turn away. But I think that's a very tragic way to go, I think. And it's also happening at a time when we need social engagement and we need real sort of political resistance than ever before. We have mass economic inequality and a whole bunch of social problems that are increasingly becoming more problematic. So we really need this engagement with the real world more than ever before. But one of the tragic things about all of this is that we're not really seeing it. We're instead seeing a turning away from the real world into the virtual world, and just this complete engagement with screens and the rise of sort of the society of the spectacle, as the French situationalists would have it. I think we're really sort of seeing that instead.
Would you say the issues identified here are universally applicable or culturally specific?
I guess that's a kind of a tough question. I think in a general sense it's fairly universal. I mean, we can talk about, say, Facebook wanting to bring mobile connectivity to Africa and things like this, or Google Loon and other projects that sort of have this spouted philanthropic sort of bent to them, but really are designed to just get people, the largest percentage of the world's population on the main platforms for the web, the corporate platforms for the web. So yeah, it goes both ways. But I don't think it's. I mean, in a general sense, it's not specific. I think it is a worldwide problem. And perhaps I'm not the only one that would have that view. I'm thinking of, I'm just trying to remember his name, Chamath Palihapitiya, I think the former Facebook executive that recently spoke out about it, who was part of his job at Facebook in 2007, I think it was trying to expand the user base of Facebook. I think he came out publicly in November of 2017, sort of saying that he had regrets about his role in sort of developing these sorts of tools, and his sort of criticism of the tools and of Facebook, but just the tools in general. He was sort of saying that it's a worldwide problem. I don't think it is sort of specific to any one place. It is something that, in a general sense, we are seeing universally. Yeah.
Moving on to the film itself, the making of it, I just wondered, how did you go about that process? How long did it take you?
The idea from 2009 with a little bit of a break, and I picked it back up in 2013, I think. So it's been I think probably a good 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, in terms of production and shaping the narrative and doing the interviews. I also composed a lot of the music for the film myself. I didn't do all of it, but a significant portion is original and was perhaps in one sense scored specifically for the film, so that took a bunch of time. But I think, yeah, it's probably safe to say 5 years, something like that. So it's a big project. It feels good to be done, you know.
And then, I mean, I guess, given, you know, what it means to contribute something such as a film or music into kind of like what could be considered a vacuum of the internet, I mean, would you say it's possible for a film like this to hold the attention of audiences in the same way as previous times through that medium, or would you be looking for other methods of distribution?
I don't know. I think that's a good question, really. I think I'm really sort of open to the spirit of experimentation, because the film is a long film and it's sort of it's a traditional sort of documentary format, but I think it is one that, well, I hope it is one that can engage people and engage people that would want to start thinking about things or perhaps want to be engaged with some of the issues. But yeah, I think I'm trying to keep just an open mind into how the sort of film gets accepted and what happens after that. It's one of the reasons why I decided to, you know, I've obviously given it away for free. It's a free thing that's being created for the purpose of like being a catalyst to form and provoke discourse, and also be used as a tool for inspiring and provoking radical social and political change.
Just to say that this film can be viewed at a website, Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, all one word, .jore.cc. Yeah, at that point, just say thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on.
Finally, a conversation from our friends at Črna Luknja in Slovenia.
Ampak se tule ni nobenega reda, nobene discipline. Se sploh ne veš, kdo komandira. Vsak ima besedo. Na svobodo se pripravljajo, to je tisto.
Na svobodo vas pripravlja Črna Luknja. Anarhistični glas na Radiu Študent. Evo nas spet nazaj v osrednjem delu. Pogovarjali se bomo z grupo anarcho-sindikalistov iz Prištine. Ali se slišmo?
Yeah, I'll wait online.
Cool. So at this point we will switch to English. Can we hear each other?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So we have comrades from Pristina with us on the line. We've met in year 2016 on the Balkan Anarchist Book Fair in Ioannina. So in order to put you on the map of organized anarchist collectives in the Balkans, we would like to ask you to say something about your group, since when it exists, and what are your perspectives, your activities.
We have the first time we have gathered around 1.5 years ago, and our activities were quite sporadic. It's really difficult to talk what specifically we are doing, because groups like ours usually are created in a place where the anarchist movement already exists, right? So they would at least have a push with other people who would join the movement easier. But we are trying at the same time, while we are forming a syndicalist movement, like a radical workers movement, we are trying to form also an anarchist movement at the same time. So we are on all sides working at the same time. But things that I could mention lately, we have worked on organizing workers in University of Pristina, specifically the cleaners in philosophical faculty and the cleaners in dormitories. Both of the struggles that we have kind of won, not completely, but to most degree. Also, we have done a lot of symbolic actions, and we are starting propaganda, big propaganda, like translating books and translating materials and stuff like that. Just basically fast.
And we've also heard that you opened a space in which you can organize.
Yes.
What are the activities that you do there? So is it like a space of meeting that a lot of people can join in and discover the topics that trigger you as a group?
True. Actually, it's not an exclusive anarchist space, but it's more of an like a wider political spectrum space, but mostly like a radical anti-parliamentarian kind of space. We call it Sabota. We call it a social center. More in Greece, they would call it a steki, like a meeting place. But it's a place that we try to connect to people who usually do not have access to this kind of information, or at least, for example, if we organize an action, those people usually don't come. But in this kind of spaces, it's more outgoing. It's kind of coffee shop / free space to organize, and there is much more communication with people from everyday life, being from workers to students. So that was kind of the sense of why we have opened it up.
Mm-hmm. And how the space is rooted? You mentioned that there is no anarchist movement that existed from before in Kosovo. So how do people perceive your political activities, your group, or maybe your space? How is it rooted in the city, in the broader society?
Hello, can we hear each other?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes, sorry. There was a cut in line. In general, people tend to feel us like we are something new and interesting. Because if you are talking about anarchism in Kosovo, they usually think of, these people who want to destroy, and more in the violent sense. But if you're talking about, let's say, communism, they would always be perceived as something that is anti-Albanian or pro-Serb. So in this sense, we have a leverage that we have an open space that we can use, but at the same time, people do not perceive it much seriously. But our actions have been getting much more attention. And specifically, we have gotten to get good relationship with the workers, specifically with the cleaners that we were working, regardless of our ideological leaning. So I think for now it's good. We are going in the small steps, and the people are perceiving it as something good. But still, we are too small to actually raise any eyebrow, and people starting opposing us.
Mm-hmm. So you said your space and your group is perceived in a good way, but what is like the general political situation in Kosovo? Like, which are the problems or the topics that trigger society to engage more, even in a more political way? So what are the topics that trigger your everyday life, people's everyday life, and are they parallel to the topics that you as a group address?
Unfortunately, what majority of triggers the people is not the social and economical problems. For example, Kosovo has 30% of unemployment, or 65% of unemployment among young population. At the same time, the average wage is 220 euros, while the minimum wage is 130 euros for people who are under the 35, or 170 for 35 and above. Without getting into any other problems like no social security or healthcare or anything like that, these things do not seem to trigger much people, although they are day-to-day problems. But unfortunately, for the last 17 years, the problem with Kosovo independence has become the thing that it used every day to crush any kind of resistance. So if you would start talking about economical issues or raising prices of electricity, it will always be the Serbia's fault or the problem of the Kosovo not having its status being regulated. So it's the best boogeyman. So the only thing that can unfortunately raise the people to their need, to stand up, are mostly this nationalistic kind of discourses. And we are trying to actually push on the other side, so the people can actually perceive the day-to-day problems as something that can raise up against.
Perfect. So it seems that the situation is quite complex. We would like to thank you for this short introduction into the general situation in Kosovo and for the presentation of your group. We are sure that you will keep up your struggle, and hopefully we'll keep in contact.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for calling.
Thanks a lot. Ciao.
All the best.
The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on WSFMLP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. You can find radio-friendly versions of this show of 59 minutes in length by visiting archive.org and searching for the collection called The Final Straw. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. If you're listening live, stay tuned for Wordplay with Jeff and Lockie.